Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. And here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading the nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, job interviewing, dates, whatever it may be. Everyday conversation that you're used to in your native languages in your countries of origin, but here in Israel in Hebrew, specifically focusing on that everyday language that Ulpan or day school or yeshiva or university may not have taught you. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you have for us to cover that we haven't in the past. Please write us either in the chat box here if you're joining us live on Zoom, or email us at nefesh b'nefesh. All of our previous lessons are up on our YouTube channel. You can just go to youtube.com, type in Nefesh B'Nefesh or Cafe Oleh. You'll see a full playlist with all of our previous lessons. And for the last several lessons, you'll see the attached spreadsheet of vocabulary that we've used. Always happy to hear for new ideas that we can offer. Apologies tonight, I'm a little under the weather, so my voice sounds a little different, but want to be sure to teach regardless of that. So let's get started today. This is also a participant request topic. So last week we talked about exceptions to the rule and how they're very much more about us coming with our issues with English towards Hebrew rather than Hebrew having exceptions within it, grammatical and pronunciation and otherwise. Tonight we're going to continue in that phase and talk about common mistakes that native English speakers make when speaking Hebrew, learning and speaking Hebrew, and offering you what to say instead. This is not about shaming anyone. We've all made mistakes. Like I said last week, emphatically, and I'm going to say it again if I have to every week. You're supposed to make mistakes when you're learning a new language. Period, full stop, however you'd like to say that, punctuation at the end of sentences. You have to make mistakes. That being said, there are certain ones that English speakers are prone to make. Part of them, and you're going to see, we're going to split it up partially in direct translating from English into Hebrew, and the other ones are pronunciations. Both of these are about the differences between languages, right? No language is universal in either its grammar, its pronunciation, or its syntax in its words. So we have to be able to adapt from one to another, understanding no one language has the monopoly over the other. I understand some people think about that with English. That is not the case in the rest of the world. We talked about that last week with certain sounds that are unique to English versus other languages. Same thing is true with Hebrew. So we're going to look at a couple of these things. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please write them in the Q&A. Apologies if you can't hear me. This is my voice. This is not a technological thing. Like I said, I am under the weather. I appreciate you bearing with me. If you're having issue with your volume, please turn it all the way up. You'll also get the recording of this on YouTube. Thank you in advance for your patience. Okay, let's share today's spreadsheet. Again, this is not about shaming anyone, but this is a compilation that we've heard both from other Olim and also from one Oleh to another. I recognize this, and I recognize we can have this conversation in a safer space than, let's say, a native Hebrew speaker would, who certainly has their own issues in learning another language. Okay, so let's get started, and we're going to get started with a controversial one. Obviously, an appropriate one, as we're talking about Olim and Hebrew and Israel, but I always like starting with this one because I talk about this one a lot. As you see, I broke it up slightly differently than in weeks past. On the far left, again, you will see you will see English. In the middle two rows, you'll see Hebrew. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the transliteration for the correct version of what we're talking about. Again, you'll see in red color what many Hebrew learners say incorrectly and what's the preferred thing to say instead. Again, you're going to make mistakes in Hebrew, and that's fine. These are ones that we hear again and again. And rather than have you make them again and again, we're going to preempt just so you know what a lot of fellow English speakers fall into saying and what you should be saying instead. This first one, though, is controversial, and I've gotten pushback from it. I accept it. I also believe that in learning Hebrew, we should already prepare you for speaking at a level that's commensurate with your other language skills. So if you're a high-level English speaker, you should feel comfortable in knowing there is a high level of Hebrew available. Even if you're not there yet, you should know at least what it is. And the first one is, how do we say in Hebrew, I made aliyah? Right? In English, we say, I made aliyah, or you made aliyah, when are you making aliyah? Right? We take the verb to do or to make plus aliyah. Hebrew, and we're going to see this again and again tonight, Hebrew is really concise, right? Instead of using a whole bunch of words, we're able to create one word. Hebrew, we've said this multiple times, it is very conservative in the amount of words it has. It doesn't have nearly as many words as English, but they're much more concise in meaning. And that's where there's a lot of beauty in this language, because you don't have to use as many letters, as many syllables to get to the same meaning. Okay, so here's a great example. What we say in Hebrew is aliti or aliti arza. The verb la'alot means to go up, to ascend, right? You can say that if you're climbing a mountain, or you could use the verb letapes, to climb. But when we use the verb la'alot, most of the time we're referring to the act of aliyah, of someone immigrating to Israel under the law of return. Now, you will hear people say, native Hebrew speakers included, asiti aliyah. Okay, and you see here in row 2, I put what is commonly heard in, or incorrectly said, in red, and what you should say on to its right. Asiti aliyah, you're going to hear that. I think it's wrong. That's why I'm starting with something controversial, to show that even I can make mistakes. But the correct way to say I made aliyah in Hebrew is not to translate it literally from English. Okay, and that's going to be a lot of these issues that you're going to see. Okay, you can say instead aliti arza. Aliti, I made aliyah, and we're specifying it, even though it doesn't need to be, arza or arza. Eretz means land. Haaretz means the land, but when we say haaretz, we're always referring to the land of Israel. Arza, we've talked about before, is a directional term. When you add the a at the end of a word like this, it's a directional suffix that means to or towards. Aliti arza, I made aliyah to Israel. Obviously, it's redundant. If you're making aliyah, it's to Israel. But just know this is the expression in formal, correct Hebrew. You are going to hear asiti aliyah. Most people will not correct you with that. Both are fine. I certainly prefer aliti arza. But let's get to ones that are much more specific, that really need to be honed in. This next one, I've heard this one so much, including from people who are otherwise fluent in Hebrew. Ha'im ani yachol. Ha'im were taught when you learn ulpan, or anytime you learn Hebrew in a very formal setting. You learn the word ha'im, and it's a question word. It's the word that we use in a question, at the beginning of a question, when it isn't a who, what, when, where, why, or how question, right? It's like a can you, or would you, or should you question. Could you please speak louder, right? That would start with ha'im. Ha'im, however, is very formal Hebrew. Okay, there are not going to be many cases in everyday conversation outside of work and very formal settings you're going to use the word ha'im. You're not going to use the word ha'im with friends. You're probably not going to use it with family either. You're not going to use it with colleagues at the same level as you in an office. Okay, so ha'im, even though you learned it in ulpan, you learned it in day school, you learned it in yeshiva, we don't use it that often. Instead, I want you to say either efshar or ani yachol. Ha'im ani yachol also touches on the can I versus may I debate, which is a big thing in English, right? We certainly have those relatives and teachers who say, who after you ask, can I do something? And then they say, I don't know, can you? In that really, let's face it, obnoxious way. Hebrew doesn't really have that. Okay, efshar is the most polite way to ask a question. Even in informal settings, efshar is preferred far above ha'im. Okay, so if I'm asking, ha'im ata yachol להוריד את volume, could you lower the volume? Instead, I would say, אפשר להוריד את volume. Very polite, number one. Number two, I don't have to conjugate, so it makes it easier for anyone, especially beginner's level of Hebrew. You don't have to conjugate the verb. Third, it's fewer words. We've talked about this before. The fewer words, the better. As long as you're understood and the meaning is there, the fewer words that possible. Ha'im ani yachol. 3 extra words as opposed to efshar. Right? This is always going to win. 1 word over 3. Okay, so first off, efshar, if you have to start with ani yachol, and it's not necessarily a rhetorical question, right? You're not asking this out in the blue, you're asking to help. Simply ask ani yachol. If you're going to be saying ani yachol, you're usually in an informal setting, and again, ha'im is just not relevant. If you're in an informal setting, ha'im is way too fancy and way too formal of Hebrew. Ani yachol azor lach. Can I help you? You could also say efshar la'azor lach. Both mean the same thing. One is just nicer than the other. Efshar is much nicer than saying ani yachol la'azor lach. Ani yachol is a little bit more straight to the point, blunt, if you were. It's not that it's impolite, it's just a little bit less formal, casual. I don't know. The point is, efshar is much nicer. And yachol is perfectly fine. It's just a little bit more gruff. You're not being sarcastic. You're not being anything else like that, okay? Similar. Ha'im ata yachol. This sounds similar to the last one, but I'm going to show you something slightly different when we say this one. Ha'im ata yachol. Can you or would you? Instead of ha'im ani yachol. Okay, ha'im ata yachol. Also, I want us to stop saying this construct because ha'im we just don't use on an everyday basis. Instead, efshar, same thing. Efshar will always be understood in the context of the rest of your question. Whether you're just speaking about myself, someone else, whoever's going to be doing the action, it will be understood. Trust me. Or you can say taychol. Taychol azor li. Could you help me? Listen to how I say it, even with my under the weather voice. Taychol azor li. You can see it both in the transliteration and in the Hebrew. We just condense the ata, right? Because it's one extra syllable. And remember, the fewer syllables and words that still convey the same meaning, the better. And in everyday spoken Hebrew, just like we did the other week with ta, that stands for et ha. Same here. Taychol azor li, instead of ataychol azor li, ataychol azor li sounds really emphatic to the point of pushy. Like, could you help me out? Like, I see you just standing there. Could you help me out? If that's the kind of connotation you want to have, by all means. But if you're just speaking to someone with no added attitude, taychol azor li is perfectly all right. It's perfectly objective. It can also have some attitude, but it doesn't have to be understood as such. Or simply efshar. Okay? In other words, in these two, rows 3 and 4, I am politely telling you, don't use ha'im nearly as often as you think you should. Okay? I understand the desire because the do you and can you and would you makes sense to have something there. It makes just as much sense. Okay. This is a big one. This is a big one, especially for my fellow Americans, but also our other English speakers, particularly from Canada and the UK. We say slicha. Do not say, if you have ever said the following, stop saying it now. Slicha bevakasha. Do not say that. And it's not because it's just redundant, which it is. You don't need to be, again, this affected in being polite. It's not that Israelis are rude. That's the wrong mindset. There's a really good Hebrew instructor out there, if you've never heard of his name, Guy Charette, who also does Hebrew podcasts. And he talked about this a lot, that he says that the Israeli mentality is about believing that we live in a one big family or one big community, whether you think of it as the shtetl or the mellah or just one big extended family. The point, though, is we don't have to be so formal and so affected in speaking to one another, right? And that's what he uses to explain why customer service is bad, because no one wants to be above another or below another. This is a great example of it. Slicha. Slicha is just enough to say to someone to get their attention. Or as I use it, as someone is walking in the middle of the streets in Tel Aviv, either at a very slow pace or decides to stop in the middle of the sidewalk, in a very narrow sidewalk, I'll stop, walk by them, and in a very emphatic voice in their ear say, Slicha. Either way, it means excuse me, whether I'm being polite or I'm using it as a forceful term for someone to move. Okay? But Slicha bevakasha does not exist. It does not exist as an expression in Hebrew. The please is implied in the excuse me. I know in English we say excuse me please. Do not say slicha bevakasha. Do not directly translate from English in this context. It is only slicha. Okay, I'm saving you a whole word not to use. And you are going to be just as polite as you are in English, so too in Hebrew. Okay, there's no need to say anything other than slicha. Period. Same thing with this next one. Efshar, blah, 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 bevakasha. Another one. Could you do something, please? Again, bevakasha gets used more by native English speakers, probably than any other community, because we're so used to please and thank you and you're welcome in all those terms that in Hebrew, they're either subsumed by other words or we don't focus on them, not because we're trying to be purposely rude to someone. It's just that it's just too formal and it's too disattached rather from one another, right? Israelis will say in reply to North Americans and Western Europeans, they're too cold and they're too stiff and they're too fake. And they're so fake that they have to use all these nice words around it when in fact they don't really mean it. That's the opposite extreme here. Efshar something, bevakasha. Instead of saying that, you can say it two ways. First, you can simply say efshar. Slicha efshar cheshbon. Or efshar et cheshbon, and we're going to get to the et in a little bit. Or, and again, just like we said, tayachol, just truncate bevakasha. First off, it's bevakasha. It's a lot of the beva is an awkward sound for native English speakers. We don't have that sound, beva. Okay, so all you have to say is slicha vaksha. Okay, we truncate the bevakasha to, listen to how I say it, vaksha. Okay, just like it's written in the transliteration, and you see in the Hebrew, vaksha. Vaksha is understood to mean bevakasha. You can get someone's attention like this, vaksha, efshar, or vaksha, like to get someone to move or to get their attention, simply saying that. Okay, you don't have to say bevakasha. You can if you want, but understand, cardinal rule in Hebrew, like I said, when it's fewer syllables or fewer letters and it still has the same meaning, that's what's preferred. Vaksha. So, slicha, and you get their attention, and then it's a separate sentence to use bevakasha. Slicha, efshar cheshbon, or slicha, person replies ken, efshar cheshbon vaksha. Okay, same thing. Understand, smaller, and we don't say slicha bevakasha. That's what these two in rows 5 and 6 mean. Another one, classic one, we're translating from English into Hebrew and other Indo-European languages into Hebrew. This is a tricky one for non-native Hebrew speakers because many of us are inclined to say "Haiti rotze" when we're ordering something, because in English, if we're being polite, we would say, "I would like something," right? I would like something, please. even if the please isn't there. I would like something. And in many languages that we speak, the people who are on this call, that's how we do it. We would use the conditional tense to do it. In Hebrew, the conditional tense is the same as we do the past perfect, meaning, I'm sorry, the past, not the past, the imperfect, excuse me. Hayiti, we take the verb lihiyot, conjugated for the past, and then the next verb in the present. Hayiti rotze. Hayiti rotze in Hebrew can mean both I would like and I was wanting. Okay? You're not going to say either. You're simply going to say ani rotze. If you're at a restaurant, fancy or not, okay, and there are nicer restaurants in Israel in 2023, you're still going to order ani rotze for a male or ani rotza for female. Or you can simply say the name of the dish you would like, followed by vaksha, bevakasha or vaksha. But you're not going to say haiti rotze. Haiti rotze automatically to a Hebrew speaker sounds like the conditional tense, not the imperfect tense. Right? So they're expecting you to say something as a conditional sentence. I would like this if. That's not what you're saying when you say in English, I would like the following dish. Simply say ani rotze, ani rotza, and conjugate it accordingly. Okay? This one is a tricky one, and we're going to talk about this more next week as well. This one, okay. We often learn at an early age or whenever we're learning Hebrew that the word really or truly or seriously is bemet. And it is. The issue is how long you hold the word bemet. And pronunciation, just like spelling in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew particularly, is destiny. It has all sorts of other meanings behind it. First off, spelling is crucial, correct spelling, but pronunciation adds extra levels of meaning. So for example, if someone says something to me and I think it's incredulous, listen to how I say it in everyday modern Hebrew. Bemet, bemet, bemet. You hear how short it is? I know many Hebrew speakers, many learners of Hebrew who are saying bemet. You're not going to hear that nearly as often as biltzinut. Biltzinut comes from the word retzini. Retzini means serious. Biltzinut is more closely translated to seriously. But if you're incredulous at as what someone said to you, you're going to use biltzinut. If you need to say bemet, meaning really, truly, keep it short. Bemet. Okay. Oftentimes people will stretch it out too much. If you want to stretch it out, biltzinut has that extra syllable in there. It allows you to stretch things out. Okay, but this is a whole other way to say bemet is often overused by native English speakers when they're speaking Hebrew, when it probably should be biltzinut. What I was saying before about in English, we use multiple helper verbs to create an action, and in Hebrew we only have one word. Here's a great example. How many times have you or someone who's learning Hebrew said, Ani lokeach miklachat. I am taking a shower. You are not taking a shower. To take ani, that is literally, I am physically taking the shower installation in your bedroom or your bathroom rather to somewhere. Okay, that is not how we say this verb. Just like in English, we have a lot of these verbs, right? To take, to get, to become. Hebrew, we don't have those helper verbs. Okay, in Hebrew, it's one verb. It's lehitkalech. Lehitkalech is to shower as in oneself. To shower someone or something is lekaleach. Okay, you're rarely going to use that verb. But lehitkalech is to take a shower. In English, you would say to take a shower, right? In the morning, I need to take a shower. Baboker, ani tzarich lehitkalech. That's how you say that. To take a shower. To take a shower. 4 words in English is 1 word in Hebrew, lehitkalech. Okay, again, What works in one language isn't going to translate or work in another language. This is a great example of it. Where conservative, one word says so many other things that English has to say. Lehitkalech. Here's another great example of that. Lakachat tmuna. You have probably said this. I'm sure I said this when I was first learning Hebrew. Lakachat tmuna. This means to literally take a picture, as in someone has a picture on their mantle or by their bedside and they are moving it somewhere else. They're physically taking it with you. To photograph is litzalem. Okay? To be photographed, sorry, that's wrong. To photograph something, to be photographed. To photograph someone or something is litzalem. Ani mitzalem et habinyan. I am taking a picture of the building. Okay, or I photographed the building. I am being, someone is taking my picture, hu mitzalem oti, or ani mitzalem. Ani mitzalem, I am having my picture taken, as in I am being photographed. Okay, not what's written here in red. It's often, okay, and it's not, no one's at fault here. We're simply doing what comes instinctual to us, which we're translating literally from the English into Hebrew. Okay, just like how Israelis will translate directly from the Hebrew into English. I can do a whole other lesson on those, by the way. I am very guilty of those as well. The correct thing is litzalem, to photograph something or someone, lehitztalem, to be photographed. Okay, simple as that. Keep that in mind though. Hebrew, we love things, fewer words and fewer syllables and fewer letters. This is a great example. This one I haven't heard in a long time, but I was told by quite a number of people when I asked for suggestions, what to teach, what examples to give tonight, that they hear this one a lot. Folks, the place where you get your passport, your Teudat Zehut, where you change your address, by the way, every time you move in Israel, you need to update your address with this place. Everything that's everyday day to life. In Hebrew, listen to how it's called, Misrad HaPnim. Okay, it is not Misrad HaPanim. Panim means face. Pnim is interior. Itzuv Pnim is interior design. They're spelled exactly the same way, okay? And because we don't use the dots and the bars that indicate vowel sounds called nikud, it can get confusing. But in the context of misrad, an office, in this case, a ministry, there is no such thing as the ministry of the face or the face ministry. It sounds like an awesome name for a bar or a club, but that is not what you're talking about when you're going to get your passport. You are talking about the interior ministry. Okay, Misrad HaPnim. I understand some of these sounds are hard, and our next category, we're going to get to those sounds that are hard. Just like I said, bivakasha is a hard sound because in English, we don't have biva. Just like in English, we don't have many, if any sounds, any words that have pna. Okay, so recognize when the sounds are different than your native language and practice it. Look in the mirror as you're speaking, speak to a trusted friend, but don't move your native language's phonology, the sounds of your native language, onto another language. It just doesn't work. Okay? In this case, it especially doesn't work. And we're going to get to some really extreme examples in a little bit. You need to keep to Hebrew's laws when it comes to phonology, the sounds it makes. Pnim versus panim. Pnim, interior, panim, face. Okay? Think of it also like the word pnima. Like in our national anthem, Hatikva, we have the word pnima. Pnima means inwards, interior, inside. Okay? That's what it's referring to. Misrad pnim, what happens on the inside of the country. Okay? Very important one. Again, you don't want to show up saying that you have an appointment to Misrad HaPanim. This doesn't work. Another great one. This one I get, okay? This one is slightly different. Hebrew has, we've talked about this as well, just as Hebrew has a very concise amount of vocabulary. It also has a vocabulary that in Hebrew is much more detailed than in English. In English, we have the verb to miss, M-I-S-S. We can say, I missed you, and I missed the bus. We're using the exact same verb to miss. In Hebrew, you do not. We have two separate verbs. Lehitgagea is to miss, as in to long for someone. Ani mitgagea lecha, I miss you, in the sense of I'm longing for you to be here. That's what that means. Gagua, the verbal noun from it, means longing. Okay? Lifasfes, however, means to miss, as in something, an opportunity, or in this case, the bus. So if you want to say, we missed the bus, this was a literal sentence given to me by a colleague. If you want to say we missed the bus, it's fisfasnu et autobus. There's other verbs that you'll hear used, but this is the one you want, fisfasnu. Okay, it's a good word, fisfasnu. It sounds like you're going to pick a fight, fisfasnu, right? But this is the verb to miss the bus, not we longed for the bus. Also because lehitgagea takes the preposition el after it, not direct object, like lefasfes et haotobus. Okay, so we missed the bus, fisfasnu et autobus, not the alternative, which literally means we longed for the bus, or we longed the bus. Either way, incorrect. Fisfasnu et autobus. This is one. Okay, I also know that in Ulpan and in day school, this is certainly the case for me, and in other places you're learning Hebrew, they teach you like ha'im, all sorts of other words that just are not used or are frankly incorrect. This is a big one. How many times have you or someone else you've heard use the expression biglal she? We missed the bus, right? We just had the sentence, the sample sentence, fisfasnu et autobus, fisfasnu et autobus, and then they'll keep going to explain why. They'll say, we missed the bus because it rained, because it was raining. And they'll keep going with fisfasnu et autobus biglal she yored geshem. That is an incorrect sentence. Biglal is one of the words we use that means because or due to. Write that here, Tia. We have lots of words in Hebrew, by the way, that mean because. Ki, biglal. We're going to get to a few others, an example of how to say this correctly. And biglal is not followed by a clause. It's not followed by, it's not followed by a whole other thought. It's followed by a noun. Okay, because of. So it will never be followed by she. When you have she here as the prefix, it means that you're going to have a whole other thing. You would simply say, fisfasnu et autobus biglal geshem. We missed the bus due to the rain. Simple as that. Hear what I'm saying. The difference between we missed the bus due to the rain, we missed the bus because it was raining. Due to the rain, or because of the rain, there's no verb. There's only one word after it, and therefore it would never take she, and biglal never takes she. Biglal hageshem. There's a famous song, biglal haruach, because of due to the wind, or because of the wind. Okay? Biglal will never be followed by she. There are other terms to say because of or due to, and then you want to have a clause or a sentence following it. These are the examples. Mipnei she or kevan she. There's a whole bunch of others. So if you want to say, we missed the bus because it was raining, fisfasnu et autobus mipnei sheyarad geshem. Okay, that is a legitimate sentence. It is not an everyday sentence, however. These two examples, mipnei she and kevan she, are fancy Hebrew. High-level Hebrew, formal Hebrew, you're not going to speak in everyday conversations with people saying mipnei and kevan she. It's too highbrow. Even people who are showing off rarely speak like this. I do know some pretentious people, myself included, who will speak like this every once in a while, but we know we're doing it. It's affectation. It's a little over the top, but you're not going to speak like this. If you want to say, we missed the bus because of the rain, fisfasnu et autobus biglal hageshem. If you want to say, Fisfasnu et autobus, because it was raining, you want to have a verb in there. Fisfasnu et autobus mipnei sheyarad geshem, or ki yarad geshem. I'm going to write these two in here so you know the sample sentence that I'm saying is correct. The correct word isn't saying. Fisfasnu et ha-autobus mipnei sheyarad geshem, or Fisfasnu et ha-autobus biglal hageshem. Right? Both of these mean the exact same thing. They're just different ways of saying it. Okay? Great. Let's move on. Just make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. Don't worry, you'll see it in the recording. You want to take a screenshot. Okay, Fisfasnu et autobus mipnei she, or biglal followed by a noun. Okay, let me close this a little bit because we need to move on to our next example. Et. I get et is difficult. What do you mean? We use this word and it doesn't have a meaning. We don't have this in English. We don't have a lot of things in English, like you're clearly seeing with all these examples. Et is a great example. Et is used before a direct object. This is something you learn also when you're first learning Hebrew, and this one is used. This one definitely sticks as a rule, okay? Et, or the slang version ta, as we talked about last week, is used before a direct object, meaning that the next word is almost always going to have ha, the prefix indicating the, following it. If it's a compound word, it might be another one or two words later, but it's followed of anything that's followed that has a direct object will be preceded by et. So if you want to say, I want the apple, indicating the definite version of apple, meaning a very specific apple. I want the apple is ani rotze or rotza, depending on gender, et hatapuach. Et hatapuach. Okay, you cannot shirk this one. It must be ani rotze et hatapuach. It is 100% incorrect to say ani rotze hatapuach. I know you're thinking you can elide everything together. Like I've said before, Israelis like to glide all the vowels together. It is incorrect. Ani rotze et hatapuach. If you want to elide, you can say ani rotze tatapuach. It's not easy to say because the word tapuach begins with the same sound you need to add on, ta. Ani rotze et hatapuach. Okay? It's the only way to say when you're using a direct object, you must use et. You'll get used to it, I promise. I promise you'll get used to it. Okay, the next few words have to do with pronunciation, okay? And then we're gonna break with your questions. So the classics, I've talked about this before. Correct spelling in Hebrew is a necessity. This is difficult for the small population that has cognitive and learning issues with regards to spelling and orders of letters. For the vast majority of us, however, we don't have these issues. You need to spell correctly. This is when spell check, spelling bees of days past come into hand. You cannot swap the spelling of im with an aleph with im with an ayin. I know that in modern Hebrew, we don't pronounce ayin like they do in from Jews from Middle Eastern countries. However, im and im are two different words. Im with an aleph, if. Im with an ayin, with. You cannot swap these two. No way around that one. Pronounced exactly the same, spell different, mean completely different things. You must spell correctly. Okay. These are going to be humorous. I'm not poking fun at anyone specifically. There's no names attached to these. If you've made these before, it's fine. We're here talking about pronunciation. Just like I said, things like bivakasha. That biva is hard to say and pna is hard to say. Some of these are hard to say and they're tongue twisters. They also, by the way, give us a little illumination into why other speakers of other languages have issues speaking Hebrew, as well as, frankly, English. This is a great example of it. Nahag ani tzarich laredet, or ani tzricha laredet. Okay, laredet means to go down. It also means the fancy word in English is to alight, meaning to go off, to get off a vehicle. Right? Like if you're at certain bus stations, it will say alighting only in English, and you think there's something wrong with the English. That's the correct word in English. Alight means to alighting only means that they don't pick up new passengers there. They only drop off passengers. There have been, and again, this is coming from people telling me common mistakes they've made or friends have made. Instead said, Nahag ani tzarich laledet. Okay, laledet, laredet, they rhyme. That L and that L and R, right? Think about all the East Asian languages where L and R are very similar sounds. There's an actual reason why that. If you look at the spectrum of sounds in a grammatical way, there's a very thin difference between L and R or R. In terms of how the mouth makes the sounds and how human languages have created those sounds. They're very similar. It's the reason why you have, unfortunately, all those stereotypical jokes about East Asian people speaking English and mixing up their L's and R's. It's the same thing with native English speakers speaking Hebrew, because this is an example from an Anglo. Nahag ani tzarich laledet means driver, I need to give birth. That is not what you're saying. Driver, I need to alight here. I need to get off the bus here, or the whatever it is. Okay? Ani tzarich laredet, or laredet, or laredet. But it's a resh. Again, practice. Don't be in a rush with language. You'll get to the level of confidence and fluency where you can speak fast, but don't worry about that. There is a significant difference between laredet and laledet. Okay? You need to practice pronunciation as much as the spelling. In this case, pronunciation is a key. Here's another one. We get tongue twisted with the letters. Even if you don't have dyslexia, this happens to me all the time. When we're tired, when we're overwhelmed by the language, it's perfectly understandable. You just want to point out from one Oleh to another when this commonly happens. This is one I've also heard before. It was also submitted to me. Mitz anavim is grape juice. But if you're saying it fast, you might accidentally say mitz avanim. Avanim are stones or rocks, okay? Because it has similar sounds. Ayin and Aleph often get mixed up. The Nun and the Bet simply get mixed around. And they look like similar words if you just quickly glance at them. But mitz anavim, grape juice. Not rock juice. You're not looking for rock or stone juice. You're looking for grape juice. Mitz anavim. Anavim, grapes. Okay. Another one, we just get tongue-tied, and it's fine to be tongue-tied. It's a different set of sounds than English. We can't project English sounds onto Hebrew. Okay, tapuach adama. We had this word a few weeks ago when we were talking about Chanukah. Tapuach adama, potato. Literally means apple of the earth. It comes from the same expression that we use in a lot of other languages, including French. Tapuach is an apple, adama, land. Okay, it is not patuach adama. It sounds very similar because the last letter, chet, has that ah vowel at the end, and we don't often see that. So patuach means open, right? It's not, this doesn't mean anything, patuach adama. Tapuach adama, however, does mean something. Before we get to our last word, which is a little bit more humorous, and then I take your questions, there is one I omitted. It was a last minute change because this one is just too commonplace. I didn't want to single out any one sub-community in Olim. It is particularly how some Olim say the name of the city I live in. Okay, it's Israel's second largest city, Tel Aviv. In modern Hebrew, it's Tel Aviv. That yud between the two vets indicates a long E sound, Tel Aviv. Many Brits, quite a number of American speakers will say Tel Aviv. I didn't include that here because if there's enough people saying it, it's like Asiti Aliyah. it's wrong. Like, again, it's wrong, but enough people are saying it that it's becoming accepted. Just like a lot of things in language, it's constantly evolving. Native Israelis, native Hebrew speakers will always say Tel Aviv. Okay, it's Tel Aviv. Both in terms of where the syllable, the emphasis on the syllable has to be, as well as that yud is the indicator, like we talked about last week. It has to be e, not I. However, it's not here. You do you with the name of this city. Okay. All right. The last one is a joke. I'm not going to explain this beyond a PG-13 explanation. If that even offends you, hold your ears for another minute or so. This is another tongue twister. Lehitlonen. That tla sound, the combination of taf with a silent vowel followed by lamed, is a hard sound to make for a native English speaker because we don't have that sound. Okay, we don't have tla in English. We don't have bava, we don't have pna, and we don't have tla. However, this word, if you're going to use this word, and this means to complain, so chances are in everyday life, whether you're an Oleh, Tsaba, a native Israeli, or just being an everyday human being in 2023, you're going to want to complain. And if you want to complain in Hebrew, you're going to have to master how to say this word. It is a tongue twister. Okay, full disclosure, it's a tongue twister. You need to say this word correctly for the following reason. If you don't say lehitlonen and you indicate that following that taf with the silent vowel, there's a lamed, the way that many Anglos will say it, and this is a joke that's been passed around since the 1970s in the dorms from Hebrew University, is to say the verb, which doesn't exist but is understood, lehitonen. Okay, lehitonen, PG-13 meaning is to pleasure oneself. Okay, be very careful with this. And the joke is, someone comes home from Ulpan, they specifically chose a native Hebrew speaker because they wanted to be immersed in the language. They had a really hard day in class. They at an early stage, a lower level, but they still really want to speak all in Hebrew. They get back and they say to their roommate, in Hebrew, I had a really bad day. I really need to complain. However, they did not say lehitlonen. They said the other verb. The roommate got very confused and embarrassed and said, do you want me to leave the room? And he said, no, I need you here because I need to complain. Only they didn't say lehitlonen. If you're going to use this verb, practice that sound, tla, lehitlonen. Okay, follow the transliteration over here. It gives you where you can break up the sounds. Lehitlonen. Okay, fair warning. If you mess up this one, you will make a lot of people very happy and smile and perhaps laugh, but no, it's at your expense, unfortunately. Okay, I see we have a bunch of Q&A. I'm going to stop here and take as many questions as I can. I see a lot of questions that are not about this lesson. I'm going to skip right over those. Folks, if you have questions about anything other than this lesson, please write it in the chat. We will be going over the chat, my colleagues and I at Nefesh B'Nefesh. Thank you in advance. James asks a great question. Ta, masculine and or feminine, does it work for both? Great question, James. Let me go back up there. It does not. You are going to have to say at yichola. Okay, if to a female, it's at, not ata, and yichola. So at yichola. You can hear, though, many people will say at yichola versus at yichola. You almost make the T, the taf, the T sound in taf, almost like a stop, like at yichola. You almost don't hear it when you try to elide it together. Just like in tayichol, it's almost implosive, that ta, but you would say at yichola. No, so ta in this case is an abbreviation for ata. Great question, James. Esther, can one say cheshbon vaksha? Yes, absolutely, Esther. You can get someone's attention, the waiter's attention, and just either do the universal sign. By the way, folks, if you don't know this in Israel already, this does work in Israel. You know, the stereotypical signing of a check. You can simply just say cheshbon vaksha. but be polite and make it a question. Don't say cheshbon vaksha. It's a little forceful. It's a little gruff. In Israel, we are learning to be polite with manners. People do have manners, just not necessarily the same way they operate in your country of origin. You can also say אפשר חשבון בבקשה, but חשבון בבקשה is perfectly all right. Sanford asked, is mamash the same as biltzinut? No, because biltzinut is asked as a question. Biltzinut, mamash is mamash means literally, it means very or much. When you reply to someone who says something incredulous, that's incredulous to you, and you say mamash, it's like, yeah, right. Biltzinut is get out of here, or are you serious? You're still asking them a question even though you don't believe them. Mamash is also you don't believe them, but you're already placing judgment. You're even placing more judgment on it. Like, get out of here. Yeah, right. Okay. Gary also has the same thing. Again, biltzinut, I'm only referring to people who say bemet more often than they should. Bemet as a question should really be substituted most of the time for biltzinut. Mamash means a similar thing, but it's a different context, folks, and it's not a question. See a couple of people asking about mamash. Great that you know the word mamash. It's a great word to use. But again, it means yeah, right. It doesn't mean really. Ken, are these correct? No. Ken asks a couple things. These are incorrect, Ken. Cheshbon vaksha or cheshbon bevakasha, and אפשר לצלם אותי or אפשר לצלם אותנו is a way to ask someone, can you take a picture of us? Do not use the verb לקחת, to take. I know that's how we say it in English. It is not how we say it in Hebrew, like I explained before. Ken, do we use zakuk? אתה זקוק לזה. I don't know what you're referring to, but zakuk is a word in Hebrew. It means, yes, we do say that in certain contexts. I need a little bit more context there, Ken, with your question. Okay. Okay. I see someone asking the difference between with the voweling. Folks, we don't use vowels outside of learning Hebrew. Okay. Misrad hapnim. I see a couple people trying to work with the voweling that my automatic generator used for it. It's misrad hapnim. That's how we say it. Misrad hapnim. Okay. However you get around that and where you need to put the emphasis, and that's all up to you. Why isn't there a dagesh in fisfasnu? Great question, folks, because we talked about that the other week. I don't know. My guess is that fisfasnu is lefasfes, because also the verb is lefasfes. It's one of two things. It's either an onomatopoeia in origin or it's not Hebrew in origin. But also because the original verb is lefasfes. We keep the f there, even though it should be starting with the dagesh because it's the beginning of the word. Great question. I'm glad you remembered that last week. Esther asks, what's wrong with saying ki yirad geshem? There's nothing wrong with saying ki yirad geshem. Esther, I'll even put it in here to emphasize there is nothing wrong with saying it. I will tell you though, native Hebrew speakers, by and large, when they're speaking average everyday Hebrew, they're not always going to use ki. Ki in formal Hebrew means for. And it's a little bit more formal because that's the context we normally hear this verb. This word everyday Hebrew, I know in religious Hebrew, we use the word ki a lot, but in everyday modern Hebrew, we don't hear it nearly as often. But you could say, vis fas nu et ha-otobus ki yarad geshem. You can absolutely say that. Okay. Thank you for asking. Okay. Um, okay, we have someone who's an anonymous attendee asking a lot of great questions. Some of these are relevant, some of these are not. I'm going to get back to them because they're not necessarily asking about this week's class, but let's see one that is. He wants an apple. An apple is not a definite article. An or a is a word we don't have in Hebrew, but it's indefinite. The is definite. He wants an apple. Hu rotze tapuach. He wants an apple. Hu rotze tapuach. Hu rotze et tapuach. He wants the apple. Only before direct objects. Okay, let me just, we're getting a lot of questions here. And a lot of questions, again, that don't have to do with this class. I'm going to try to get to as many of them, folks, as possible. Okay. Okay, we got a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to weed through the questions that are relevant to this lesson, and what little time we have, any other general questions, but we have still with this one. Now, Anonymous asks, Haiti Mamlitz, very formal. Again, I would recommend is really formal, just like it sounds in English. I would recommend the following to you. We don't say that in everyday English when we're just trying to say, I recommend. Same thing in Hebrew. Haiti Mamlitz is what a waiter would say to you, right? In a very formal setting, but most of the time, Ani Mamlitz, I recommend, is more than okay. Aryeh, how do we use lafsid? Lafsid is to lose, not to miss. Ifsadati, I missed. I lost, excuse me. Lafsid is to lose. Ifsadati, I lost. That could be a match. That could be a case. That could be a game. Anything like that. Okay. I see a lot of people flexing very formal Hebrew. Kol hakavod that you have very formal Hebrew in your pocket. I'm trying to focus on everyday Hebrew here, folks. Okay. Ma birtzoncha is way too formal Hebrew for this class's goal, which is everyday Hebrew. You are not going to hear ma birtzoncha. What is your desire? What is your will? On an everyday basis. We just don't talk about that. Even me dressed like this, don't talk like that. But good that you know these words. Shirley asked a great question, which is a preview for next week. I'm going to get to that one. Shirley, I'm going to answer you just at the end as the last question here. Ken, is zakuk interchangeable with rotze? No. Rotze means want. Zakuk means need. Zakuk is closer to tzarich, need. Not rotze, which means want. Just like the difference in English between need and want, same thing here. Why do some people drop the sound of ha at the beginning of words like the French? That's simple pronunciation. When it's easier, again, we talked about aesthetics last week. I suggest all of you, especially those who are asking about pronunciation, to review last week's class, which is already up on YouTube. Pronunciation, aesthetics, and the comfort of pronunciating Hebrew within Hebrew's sound and phonology, as it's called, is key. So if saying, if the sound ha sounds more like ah, but it's understood what the context is and that it's saying ha, it's understood. Context is key, just like in any other language. Hebrew is no different. Just because they hear at the end doesn't mean it's a whole other thing. The context will ensure it's ha. We're just not pronunciating it. We're not just not saying it because it either we're talking fast or it just sounds better, whatever it may be. It's not that it's not there. We're just pronouncing it softer. Okay. Okay, we see a bunch of other questions. I said I would get to, where's your question? Where was hers? Where was hers? Sorry. Shirley's question. What about walla? Isn't that also really? Great question, Shirley. Walla is an Arabic word that we use in Israeli slang that can mean a whole bunch of things. It can mean really. You don't say, oh my goodness, a whole bunch of different things. And this is a great preview. Thank you, Shirley, for this question, because next week's lesson is going to be about nonverbal communication, all of those clicks and hand gestures and different sounds that you've heard that you may not know their meaning, as well as words that have different meanings based on their tone and pronunciation, like the word wala, like the word barur, like the words yalla, and all sorts of other words. And mamash that we just had before, a whole bunch of words that change the meaning based on how they're pronounced. So nonverbal and words that have multiple meanings based on tone is next week. Toda rabah, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Again, if you have any questions for requests for future topics for us to cover that we haven't already and that aren't up on the YouTube playlist, please write to us at Nefesh B'Nefesh. You'll get a recording of this class as well as the spreadsheet in the next few days. Toda rabah. Thank you so much, and I will see you all next week here at Cafe Oleh. להתראות.